I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to suspect my wife of cheating. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have laughed at the idea. But here I am, sitting in the car outside an upscale hotel in a city I shouldn't even be in, trying to steady my breathing. The funny thing is, I almost didn't come here. I wanted to believe that everything was normal, that the way she had been acting was just stress from work. After all, business trips can be exhausting, right? Her name is Emma. She's 31, with long black hair that always seems perfectly in place, even after a full day of meetings. She's got that kind of effortless confidence that turns heads whenever she walks into a room. It's what made me fall for her in the first place. She can be charming, bold, and when she puts on those form-fitting pencil skirts and heels, she's downright irresistible. That's why it stings so much now, knowing that someone else is getting the side of her that used to be mine. I first noticed something was off about 6 months ago. Emma's job required her to travel often, and I never questioned it. We've always been solid, or so I thought. But one night, I was scrolling through Netflix, waiting for her usual goodnight text from whatever hotel she was staying at. The text came, but it was weirdly short and formal. Late night. Talk tomorrow. Love you. Not her usual emojis, no inside joke. Just cold, like she was on autopilot. I let it go, but the next morning, I woke up with a sinking feeling. Something wasn't right. Her trip started lasting longer, with more last-minute meetings and networking dinners that seemed to stretch into the early hours of the morning. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband, but little things began adding up. The way she always seemed glued to her phone, even when she was home. The subtle shift in the way she smiled at me, like she was carrying a secret she couldn't, or wouldn't, share. Then there were the business trips. Always with the same colleague, Mark. Mark. I'd met him once at a company event. He was the type of guy you forget as soon as you meet him, bland, corporate, all clean-cut in a way that made me feel like I didn't need to worry. But recently, his name started creeping into our conversations more. Mark says we should try this place for dinner while we're in Chicago, or Mark's been killing it on the sales front. Mark. He was inescapable, and I tried to ignore how often he came up. Maybe they were just friends. Maybe work trips were really that boring, and she needed someone to hang out with. But the doubt kept gnawing at me, especially after that one night when she came home after a week in Boston. I wanted to surprise her, had planned a quiet dinner to welcome her back. She seemed distant the moment she walked through the door. She had that look in her eyes, the one where she was physically present but mentally somewhere else. And when I hugged her, I swear her perfume was different. Not the one I bought her for her birthday, but something subtle, like she had been in close quarters with someone else. I tried to shake it off, but everything changed when I accidentally stumbled across something on her phone. I wasn't snooping, I swear. She left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower, and it buzzed with a notification. I glanced at it without thinking, expecting some boring work email or another meeting alert. But it wasn't. It was a text from Mark. Can't wait for tomorrow night, winking face. That's when my heart sank. My hand froze over the screen, and I suddenly felt like I was going to be sick. Tomorrow night? She was leaving on another business trip tomorrow. This wasn't just in my head anymore. Everything clicked in that moment, the long trips, the late-night texts, the weird, disconnected conversations. The subtle way she'd been pushing me away, physically and emotionally. It wasn't stress. It was him. And the worst part? She didn't even have the decency to hide it properly. She was comfortable enough to text him while standing in our kitchen, while I was in the same house. That hurt more than anything. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I decided to play it cool, pretend I hadn't seen the message. I needed to know for sure. I needed proof that it wasn't just some work-related joke or playful banter. I wasn't going to make accusations unless I could back them up. So, while she was getting ready for her trip the next day, I kept my distance and started to form a plan. It wasn't long before I found what I was looking for. She left her laptop open on the couch while packing, and I saw a confirmation email for a hotel booking. Same hotel, same city she was supposedly going to for this work conference. The dates matched her trip exactly. And the reservation? 2 people, 1 room. That's when I knew. She wasn't just going on a business trip. She was meeting him. And now, here I am, parked outside their hotel, my stomach in knots, knowing that in just a few minutes, everything's about to change. I wasn't sure what I was planning to do when I got here. I mean, you always think about what you'd do in this situation, right? You'd think I'd barge into the hotel, catch them in the act, and confront them. Make a scene. Scream, throw something, demand answers. But sitting here in my car, staring at the bright neon lights of the hotel's entrance. It didn't feel like that at all. Instead, there was just this cold, heavy feeling settling in my gut, like I was on the edge of something I couldn't come back from. I checked the time on my phone. 9:48 p.m. They were probably together by now, and that thought hit me like a punch to the stomach. What were they doing right now? Were they having drinks in the hotel bar, laughing like nothing was wrong? Or were they upstairs, in that room? God, I could almost picture it, Emma sitting on the edge of the bed, her legs crossed in that perfectly poised way she always does, looking at him with those eyes that once belonged to me. This was insane. I was sitting here torturing myself with these thoughts when I could go up there and get the truth. It had been easy enough to find out the hotel. Her laptop gave me everything I needed, room number, booking confirmation, even the dates. She had no idea I'd seen any of it. In fact, when she kissed me goodbye earlier that morning, she was all smiles, as if nothing in the world was wrong. "I'll be back Friday," she had said, giving me one of those casual pecks on the lips that felt almost dismissive. I didn't kiss her back the same way. I couldn't. Not after what I knew. I had booked a room in the same hotel, 2 floors down from theirs. It felt strange, being so close to them without her knowing. But I needed to be here. I needed to see for myself. It was one thing to suspect, to have the proof sitting in front of me in black and white. But seeing them together, that would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. I finally pulled the keys from the ignition and stepped out of the car. The night air was crisp, and the faint hum of traffic in the distance made everything feel oddly calm. I grabbed my overnight bag from the back seat, not that I planned on staying long. This was about confrontation, not comfort. I didn't know what would happen once I got up there, but one thing was for sure, I wasn't leaving without answers. The hotel lobby was one of those sleek, modern designs, glass everywhere, polished marble floors, the faint scent of citrus and bleach in the air. It was the kind of place you'd expect for corporate travelers, sterile and impersonal. The kind of place where everyone kept to themselves, too busy with meetings and emails to notice anyone else. I walked up to the front desk, trying to act casual, like I wasn't about to confront the 2 people who had been betraying me behind my back. The receptionist barely looked up as I checked in, handing me my room key with a practiced smile. It struck me how normal all of this felt to everyone else in the building, while my entire world was unraveling. When I got to my room, I didn't bother unpacking. I dropped the bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I was 2 floors down from her, just 2 floors. The thought alone made my skin crawl. Were they up there already? I imagined her stepping out of the shower, her long black hair still wet, slipping into some robe or lingerie I didn't even know she owned, while Mark poured them a drink. I checked my phone again, scrolling through our last messages. I was looking for something, anything, that might explain this away. Some sign that I was wrong, that I had misread the situation. But no, it was all there, right in front of me. The missed calls, the distant texts, the shift in tone. She had been pulling away for months, and I had been too blind to see it. Or maybe I didn't want to. That's when I noticed the text she'd sent me just an hour earlier. "Busy day. Gonna crash early. Love you." It was the same line she'd been feeding me for weeks now. The same line I had believed, until tonight. I couldn't sit here anymore. I grabbed the room key and headed for the elevator. My heart was racing, my palms sweaty as I hit the button for her floor. The ride up felt like it took forever, the elevator humming softly as it climbed, floor by floor, carrying me toward the inevitable. When the door slid open, I stepped out into the hallway, the beige carpet muffling my footsteps. I walked slowly, almost cautiously, as if part of me still wasn't ready for what I was about to find. Her room was at the end of the hall. 1023. I could see the number from where I stood, just a few doors down now. My mind was racing with everything I wanted to say, everything I wanted to ask. Why? How long? Was it just him, or were there others? Was it just physical, or was she falling for him? Did she ever feel guilty? I was standing outside their door now, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I raised my hand, hesitating for just a moment. This was it. After this, everything would change. There was no going back. My knuckles hovered just inches from the door, and for a second, I considered walking away. Maybe I could pretend I hadn't seen anything. Maybe we could just go back to the way things were. But I knew better. I knocked. The sound of my knock felt louder than it should have been, echoing in the empty hallway. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. My hand was still hovering in the air, just inches from the door, as if my body was frozen in that single moment of decision. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, the nervous energy buzzing through my whole body like an electric current. What now? What if they didn't answer? Or worse, what if they did? The seconds stretched into what felt like minutes, and I had the overwhelming urge to turn and leave. This whole situation was ridiculous. I was standing outside the hotel room of my own wife, waiting to confront her like some cliché out of a bad movie. What the hell was I doing? But before I could make any decision, I heard movement from the other side of the door. A soft shuffle, followed by low voices, too muffled to make out. My breath caught in my throat as I leaned in closer, trying to decipher who was speaking. Was it her? Was it him? Suddenly, a voice. Clearer now, but still muted through the heavy hotel door. A woman's voice, laughing softly. It was her. It was Emma. I felt the ground shift beneath me. There it was, the confirmation I had been dreading but knew was coming. My heart plummeted, the weight of the moment settling in like a rock in my chest. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. I wasn't imagining things. She was in there, with him, laughing like nothing was wrong. The rational part of me, the part that had been trying to keep things together all these months, wanted to stay calm, wanted to take a breath and think this through. But another part of me, the part that had been simmering with rage ever since I saw that first text, was pushing me forward. My hand clenched into a fist, ready to pound on the door again. But then, I paused. What if I heard more? I didn't know why, but I pressed my ear to the door, holding my breath, trying to catch every word. The low murmur of voices continued. Her voice, light and teasing, sounded way too familiar with whoever was in there. She wasn't acting like she was at a business meeting. She was acting like she was on a date. And that's when I heard the unmistakable sound of glasses clinking together, probably toasting to something I didn't want to know about. I felt sick. My mind started racing again, faster this time. Was this the first time? How long had this been going on? Did she feel any guilt? Was I even a thought in her mind while she was with him? And then I heard something that made the blood drain from my face. Emma, you're incredible, a man's voice said, laughing softly, the kind of laugh that men use when they're flirting. That smooth, almost smug tone that made me want to break the door down right then and there. Mark. Of course it was him. It had always been him. The voice confirmed everything. I felt this surge of anger rise up, hot and fierce, mixing with the deep sense of betrayal that had been growing inside me for months. She had been with him, laughing, drinking, and God knows what else, all while feeding me lies about business trips and late-night meetings. Every late night she spent with him was a night I had been sitting at home, trusting her, waiting for her to come back to me. How could I have been so stupid? I pressed my hand to the door, closing my eyes for a moment, trying to collect myself before I did something I couldn't take back. Part of me wanted to storm in, to catch them right there, in the act, and rip them both apart. I wanted them to see the hurt they'd caused, to make them feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling right now. But I knew that wouldn't help. I wasn't here for some big, dramatic scene. I was here for answers. I was here because I needed to see it for myself, to look her in the eyes and ask her why. I took a step back from the door, my hand shaking as I clenched it into a fist again. I could feel the tension building in my body, the adrenaline making it hard to think clearly. I wanted to knock again, harder this time, but I hesitated. The sound of their voices continued, oblivious to the storm brewing just outside their door. And then I heard something else. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. The sound of footsteps approaching from down the hall. I turned my head, heart racing as I saw a hotel staff member coming toward me, pushing a cart of fresh towels and linens. He gave me a polite nod as he passed, completely unaware of the chaos unfolding in my head. But that small, ordinary moment, just a man doing his job, brought me back to reality. This wasn't the place for a confrontation. Not like this. I needed to be smart about this. I needed to confront Emma in a way that would leave no room for excuses, no chance for her to twist the story. I couldn't afford to let my emotions get the best of me, not when I was this close to the truth. But God, the temptation to break that door down right now was overwhelming. I stepped away from the door, moving down the hall and leaning against the wall, out of sight. I needed a moment to breathe, to think, to calm the raging fire in my chest. I pulled out my phone, scrolling mindlessly through our old photos, the ones where we were happy. Our wedding day. Vacations. Even stupid selfies from when we were just dating. It all felt so distant now, like those two people in the photos were from a completely different life. A life that had ended the moment I realized she was in that room with him. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of the fog. A text. From Emma. Long day. About to crash. Miss you. I stared at the screen, the words twisting the knife deeper into my chest. How could she lie so easily? How could she type those words, knowing exactly where she was and who she was with? I looked back toward the door, the number 1023 glaring at me, taunting me. I was so close. So close to finally getting the answers I needed. My hand tightened around my phone as I took a deep breath and started walking back toward the door. This time, I wasn't going to hesitate. I raised my hand again and knocked, harder this time, my knuckles connecting with the wood in 3 sharp taps that echoed down the hall. There was no turning back now. The moment I knocked, the voices inside the room went silent.
My heart was pounding so hard that I felt dizzy, and for a second, I wondered if I was about to pass out.
All the anxiety and rage swirling inside me, tightening like a vice in my chest, had reached a peak. I waited, every second feeling like an eternity. Would they answer? Would they pretend not to be there? I imagined them freezing, looking at each other with that guilty expression, knowing they'd been caught, but unsure what to do next. Maybe they'd panic. Maybe they'd just open the door, faces full of shock. Either way, the moment was coming, and I could almost hear it ticking down like a bomb ready to go off. Footsteps approached the door, and I felt my throat tighten. I couldn't tell who it was, Emma or Mark, but it didn't matter anymore. I was going to see the truth right in front of me, and there was no more running from it. No more guessing. No more hoping this was all some misunderstanding. A shadow moved behind the peephole. Whoever was on the other side had stopped, probably checking to see who was there. I stared straight ahead, my pulse hammering in my ears. I wondered if Emma would recognize me from just my silhouette, or if she was in such a different mindset that it wouldn't even cross her mind that I'd be standing outside her hotel room, unannounced. The doorknob jiggled. Then, slowly, it turned. And then it stopped. A voice from inside. Emma's. Quiet, but sharp. Wait. Wait? My mind reeled. Was she telling Mark not to open the door? Did she know it was me?
For a split second, I considered walking away again.
Maybe I didn't need to see this. Maybe I could still pretend like I didn't know, go back to my room, let this night pass in some haze of denial. But the anger rising in my chest wouldn't let me. I couldn't walk away. I needed to see her face when she realized I knew. I needed to hear whatever lies or excuses would spill from her mouth when she saw me standing here, eyes wide with betrayal. I knocked again, louder, this time. More insistent. Whoever was inside needed to know I wasn't going anywhere. The time for games was over. Emma, I said, my voice low but firm, calling her name through the door. The words came out more calmly than I expected. There was a pause. Silence hung in the air, thick and heavy, as if the entire hotel floor was holding its breath. I could hear the faint hum of the elevator at the other end of the hallway, the distant murmur of voices from somewhere on the floor below. But from inside that room, nothing. I waited. Then, finally, there was movement. The door opened just a crack, and there she was, Emma. My wife. Her face was half hidden behind the door, but the expression in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. There was a flash of panic, quickly masked by a forced calmness that I knew too well. She had always been good at keeping her composure, at pretending things were fine, even when they weren't. But she couldn't hide the guilt in her eyes. Not from me. Wah. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice trembling just slightly. She tried to sound casual, like she was just surprised to see me, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand gripped the edge of the door a little too tightly. She was nervous. She knew. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in what felt like months. She was wearing the same professional attire she always did on these trips, that perfectly tailored business suit that hugged her slim figure, hair still styled to perfection, even after a long day. But something about her seemed different now. It wasn't the clothes, or the hair. It was her. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the Emma I had known for years. She was someone else entirely. I was in the area, I said, the words coming out flat, almost mechanical. Thought I'd surprise you. Her eyes flickered, and I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to come up with an explanation, some excuse that would make all of this seem innocent. But we both knew there was no explanation that would change the reality of the situation. She opened her mouth to say something, but before she could speak, I glanced past her, into the room. That's when I saw him. Mark was standing near the small table by the window, his face pale, his hands awkwardly stuffed in his pockets like a guilty schoolboy caught doing something wrong. He looked as stunned as Emma, but there was something else in his expression, something like fear. He wasn't a big guy, not much taller than me, but in that moment, he looked small. Cowardly. He didn't say a word, just stood there, frozen, waiting to see how this would all play out. My eyes shifted back to Emma. I could feel my throat tightening, the rage boiling just beneath the surface, but I didn't let it show. Not yet. "So, are you going to invite me in?" I asked, my voice cold, each word carefully controlled. It was a question, but we both knew the answer. There was no invitation coming. She wasn't going to let me into that room, not with him standing there like a ghost. She hesitated, her lips parting as if she was about to say something, anything, but nothing came out. The silence stretched on between us, and in that moment, it felt like the entire world had collapsed into this tiny space between the door and the hallway. Just give me a minute," she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced over her shoulder at Mark, her expression pleading, like she was silently begging him to do something, to help fix this. But he just stood there, useless, watching it all unfold like a spectator at a car crash. I could feel my patience wearing thin. I wasn't here for her games, for her to figure out some clever way to lie to my face. I wasn't here to give her time to come up with another story. I was here for the truth, no matter how ugly it was. I took a step forward, pushing the door open just a little more. She stepped back instinctively, giving me just enough space to move past her. As I stepped into the room, the sterile atmosphere of the hotel felt suffocating. The scent of cheap air freshener mixed with the heavy tension in the air made my stomach churn. Mark stood frozen, his eyes darting between Emma and me, like he was waiting for permission to speak. To defend himself. But no words came. What could he say? I turned back to Emma, the question burning on my tongue. "How long?" My question seemed to hang in the air like a heavy weight, crushing, unavoidable. I could see Emma flinch, her eyes darting toward the floor as if looking for an escape, a way to avoid the inevitable. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. "How long?" I asked again, my voice lower this time, but the edge sharper, like a knife pressing against her skin. She still didn't answer, her lips trembling as she looked at me, then quickly over at Mark. He hadn't moved. The coward hadn't said a single word since I stepped into the room. I wasn't even sure if he was breathing at this point. His face was pale, and he looked more terrified than guilty, which only made my blood boil more. How could someone like him have gotten between us? 3 months? I guessed, my voice cold and detached, as though I was talking about something trivial. 6? A year? I took a step closer to her, and she took a small, hesitant step back, almost as if she was afraid to answer. "Jay, just let me explain," she stammered, her voice barely holding together. Her usual confidence, the poised woman who always seemed so in control of everything, was gone. What was left in front of me was a broken version of Emma, scrambling for words that wouldn't come. "Explain?" I said, laughing bitterly. "What's there to explain, Emma? You're here. With him." I pointed at Mark, who looked down at the floor the moment my finger aimed in his direction. I can see it with my own eyes. She didn't respond, her hands shaking as she rubbed her palms together nervously. I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy for her. Not now. Not after everything she'd done. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered, her voice cracking. Hurt me? That's all she could say? That's what she thought this was? My head spun with everything I wanted to say to her, the words fighting each other in my throat, trying to claw their way out. But in the end, it all boiled down to one simple question, the one that had been gnawing at me ever since I first suspected. "Why?" I asked, my voice suddenly quieter. The anger, the rage, it was still there, but underneath it all was that one burning need to understand. Why him? Why this? Her eyes met mine for a second, and I could see the guilt, the shame. But also something else. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to see. "I don't know," she said softly, shaking her head as if she didn't have the answer herself. "It just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Didn't mean for it to go this far. That's what people always say, isn't it? Like it was all some kind of accident, like they just stumbled into bed with someone else by mistake. As if that could erase the months of lies, the constant betrayal. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep control. I didn't trust myself to speak for a moment, afraid that if I opened my mouth, I'd explode. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing tighter, suffocating me with every second that passed. "You didn't mean for it to go this far," I repeated, my voice hollow. "But it did, Emma. It did. And now here we are." Mark shifted uncomfortably in the background, still silent, still pretending like this wasn't about him. The sight of him standing there made my skin crawl. What was it about him that had pulled her away from me? I couldn't understand it. There was nothing special about him, nothing that justified throwing away everything we had built together. What now? I asked, more to myself than to her. What was I supposed to do with this? How was I supposed to move forward knowing she had been with him, here, lying to me with every text, every kiss goodbye? Emma wiped at her eyes, shaking her head again, as if she was as lost as I was.
I don't know, she whispered.
I'm sorry. Sorry, I repeated, the word sounding so small, so useless in the face of what was happening. Sorry wouldn't fix this. Sorry wouldn't erase the nights she had spent with him, the lies she had told me every time she came home late, pretending everything was fine. I turned toward Mark, unable to hold it in any longer. What about you, huh? Got nothing to say for yourself? My voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy silence like a blade. He flinched, finally meeting my eyes for the first time. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Instead, he just stood there, frozen, like he was waiting for someone to rescue him from the mess he had helped create. But no one was coming to save him. I never meant to, he started, his voice shaking, but I cut him off with a glare. I didn't care what he had to say. Nothing he could say would change any of this. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The anger, the pain, it was all swirling inside me, crashing together like waves in a storm, but there was something else underneath it all. Something cold, calm, and final. I'm done, I said quietly, more to myself than to either of them. I felt the weight of those words settle over me, heavier than I expected. I'm done with this. Emma's eyes widened, and she stepped forward, her hand reaching out toward me as if she could pull me back, pull us back from this cliff. Please, she whispered. We can talk. We can figure this out. I shook my head, stepping back, away from her touch. No, Emma. We can't. The silence that followed was crushing. I could see the reality of what was happening sinking in for her, the full weight of it hitting her all at once. But there was no going back now. The trust we had, the life we had built, it was shattered. And no amount of apologies or explanations would fix that. I turned toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached for the handle. But just as my fingers brushed against the cold metal, I hesitated. For a moment, I wondered if this was really it. If I was really about to walk away from everything. I knocked once, just to hear the sound echo one last time, and then I pulled the door open, stepping out into the hallway, leaving Emma and Mark behind. And as the door closed softly behind me, I realized I didn't need to hear any more. What would you do if you found out your partner was cheating on work trips? Would you confront them or walk away?